Hello, and welcome to AI Curious. My name is Jeff Wilser. I'm a journalist, I'm a human, and I am curious about AI. And one thing that I am extra curious about is all of the ethical, moral, and philosophical questions that are bound to crop up when AI gets more advanced. This, to me, is very much at the core, the solar plexus, of what makes AI so interesting. Just for fun, let's consider what happens if AI becomes truly conscious or sentience. What are the moral implications? Now, when people think about AIs becoming alive, so to speak, it's usually from the perspective of, oh my god, they're gonna kill us all, we are screwed. But there's a flip side to this. If AIs are conscious creatures, if they feel things, if they have emotions, should they have rights? Do they deserve dignity? If someday they can look like us and sound like us and even think like us and even feel like us, do they not deserve some kind of protection? This very quickly gets into the world of philosophy. And these are questions for bigger brains than mine, which is why I was thrilled to speak with Jeff Sebo, a philosopher and professor at New York University, where he focuses on bioethics, medical ethics, environmental studies, animal welfare, and now AI. He's also the director of the Mind, Ethics, and Policy program, and he's the author of the book, Saving Animals, Saving Ourselves, where he grapples with the question, essentially, of, okay, if animals are conscious creatures, what does that mean in terms of their welfare and how we should treat them? Last year, Professor Sebo wrote an op-ed for the Los Angeles Times, What Should We Do If a Chatbot Has Thoughts and Feelings?, where he makes the case for at least the possibility of moral consideration for AIs. Now, whether you agree with Professor Sebo's ultimate position or not, and I'm still processing myself, the questions he's asking are fascinating and feel compelling to me. And the more we spoke, the more I became convinced that at some point in the future, could be 5 years from now, could be 10, could be 30, I do think the question of AI welfare or AI rights might become the most polarizing, most controversial, most hotly contested issue of our lives. And yes, I know that's saying a lot given these wild, polarized times we're in as we speak. Now, it's also possible this could happen much sooner than that. One thing that Jeff mentions toward the end of our conversation is that AI development is moving so much faster than we could have imagined even 1 year ago. Therefore, the time to be wrestling with these super tricky, hard questions, frankly, is right now, is before it's urgent, is before there's some, oh my God, the AI is sentient moment. It's better to address these issues head on while they can do it calmly and clearly and without some urgent threats. So with all of that said, please enjoy my conversation with the philosopher Jeff Sebo, professor at New York University. Professor Sebo, welcome to the pod.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Let's start with the basics of your area of focus and study, and then how AI ties into all of that.
Yeah, so my background is in philosophy. I have a PhD in philosophy, and specifically, I focus on philosophy of mind and moral and legal and political philosophy. And my early work over the past 10 years or so has focused mainly on our interactions with other animals. And so, questions about animal minds, what are animals like, and what kinds of cognitive capacities do they have, and what might it be like to be them? And then ethical and legal and political questions that follow from that about how should we interact with animals, and then how should that be reflected in our legal and political institutions.
I know you've literally written books on this, so I know it's not a short answer, but how would you describe your thesis for animal consciousness and what might surprise people about animal consciousness?
So there are a lot of capacities that might matter for ethics and law and politics. Consciousness is one of them, and then sentience and agency are others. And we might talk about all of them at some point in this conversation. In philosophy, at least, these, of course, all have different meanings. But consciousness often is thought of as the capacity to have subjective experiences that feel like something to the subject. So you are conscious in the relevant sense if it feels like something to be you. And obviously that can matter because once it feels like something to be you, then it might matter to you what happens to you, and then we might have responsibilities to you. So when we think about animal consciousness, one important background context to keep in mind is that the idea that animals are conscious is, for some people it goes back a long way, but for other people a relatively recent idea.
Mm-hmm.
As recently as the latter half of the 20th century, a lot of philosophers and a lot of scientists were convinced not only that animals are not conscious, but also that animal consciousness is not even a valid subject for scientific inquiry. And
Do they not own any dogs?
yeah, well, they accepted very demanding views about what it takes to be conscious.
Mm.
They thought that you need, for example, advanced language and reason to have consciousness, for it to feel like anything to be you. And they also thought it was difficult to study the topic scientifically because consciousness is a kind of private phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
I know that it feels like something to be me. You know that it feels like something to be you, but I can only make educated guesses about whether it feels like something to be you based on comparisons between you and me. And we think of science as a project of studying observable phenomena where we can make predictions and then test those predictions, figure out if those predictions are right and wrong. And because consciousness is such a private phenomenon, I might not ever be able to directly confirm or disconfirm hypotheses about which animals are conscious or not conscious. I might always be a little bit uncertain about that. And so for those various reasons that people held fairly demanding views about what it takes to be conscious, that people were skeptical that we can even study consciousness in other animals, if not in general, and because, of course, society depends on mass exploitation and extermination of other animals, we had all kinds of reasons to look the other way and not very seriously scrutinize our assumptions, our prevailing views about animal consciousness. Now, that has changed. Scientists have worked hard to make it a valid area of inquiry, and philosophers have worked hard to make it a valid area of inquiry too. And now the mainstream view is, in fact, that many, if not most, types of animals, at least all vertebrates and many invertebrates like octopuses, are conscious, and it does feel like something to be them.
What was the inflection point, if there was one, for when the academic community finally came around to, okay, animals are conscious?
Good question. I think that there were noteworthy people in both science and philosophy who moved the needle. So, for example, Donald Griffin wrote important work about animal consciousness that made it more respectable, credible, legitimate to talk about consciousness in the sciences. And then Peter Singer and Tom Regan wrote about animal ethics and animal welfare and animal rights from philosophical perspectives. And that made it more credible and legitimate too. So I think that when some people can take the lead like that, then it makes it easier for other people to work in those areas too and still pursue their careers and still be successful in academia. So that is a kind of partial speculative answer, but I imagine people who are more familiar with the history, who lived through that, might have a more detailed answer for you.
When did AI appear on your radar professionally? And then how does the study of animal consciousness, what can it teach us about AI consciousness?
AI has been a topic that I've been interested in for a long time. I have become more interested in it professionally in terms of my research and teaching more recently within the past decade. I think that I and other people always appreciated that AI was going to be important for philosophy, for science, for the world. And I was a little surprised by how fast it became as important as it has become. And I do think it can be valuable, as you suggest, to put animal issues and AI issues together in the same conversation, because we can learn lessons from animal minds, animal ethics, law, politics for AI systems. And one of them is that consciousness is difficult to study. Sentience, agency are difficult to study. And if we think consciousness, sentience, and agency are important for ethics, law, politics, if we think that once you become conscious, once it feels like something to be you, once you can feel pleasure and pain and have desires and preferences, if we think that that makes you a subject of moral concern, and now I can have responsibilities for you, then it matters a lot that we figure out what kinds of systems can be conscious, can be sentient, can be agential. And we should also keep in mind from our history of studying this topic with other animals that not only is it difficult to study because the only mind I can directly access is my own, but it is also difficult to study because we have a lot of bias and we have a lot of ignorance and we have a lot of motivated reasoning, because in both cases we are using these beings for our own purposes. And so we have an incentive to see them as not conscious, to see them as objects. And so we have to overcome not only our natural epistemic limitations about what we can know, but also our very strong incentive, again, to look the other way and continue to use animals, continue to use AI systems. And so we have to figure out whether they might have features that would make them matter under conditions of profound risk and uncertainty and bias and ignorance. And that is a very difficult set of circumstances to do good science and good philosophy.
What makes it, in my mind, I'm guessing, extra difficult is that in the case of animals, to be very obvious here, you can see, okay, a puppy is in pain or seems to evince emotions that look like happiness, right? You can kind of make qualitative reads on what animals are doing. It's really hard in a chatbot to figure out if there is genuine emotion behind those answers to prompts. What do you envision as, since you mentioned one of the key criteria of sentience is how something feels, and we kind of divine that for animals. How can we do that for AI? And if it's not a criteria of feeling or emotions, what other criteria can we use to determine if there is true consciousness?
Yeah, this is a really, really good question and a really tough question. So, with other animals, again, we might not ever be able to be certain about which animals are conscious or sentient. That depends on how you define these concepts, and it depends on your other views about this. We might not be able to be certain about it, but we can make educated guesses by, for example, comparing their behavior, their anatomy, and their evolutionary history to ours. And the more behaviorally, anatomically, evolutionarily continuous they are with us, perhaps the more confident we can be that they have capacities for conscious experiences, conscious motivations, the types of features that we think are enough for them to matter for their own sakes. Now, if they are discontinuous from us in those ways, that does not necessarily mean that they lack consciousness or sentience or agency, because they might have developed them in other ways. But if they have those continuities, that can give us confidence that they have those features and that they do matter for their own sakes. But as you say, AI systems might not be continuous with us in those kinds of ways. They can be behaviorally continuous with us. They can talk the same way that we do. In fact, chatbots already are talking the same way that we do. But that might not be very good evidence because they are specifically engineered to talk that way. So the fact that they do might not be particularly good evidence that they have the same kind of consciousness or sentience or agency that we do. And then the other types of continuities are necessarily absent. AI systems are not built out of carbon-based, cell-based bodies. They are built out of silicon-based, chip-based hardware. And they did not arise from a process of evolution by natural selection. They arose from a process of engineering in a laboratory. So they are necessarily discontinuous with us. And they could also be even more different from us. As different as I am from an octopus or from an ant, we at least do share those basic continuities because of our shared evolutionary history. But AI systems could be way different from me, even more different from me than even an octopus or an ant is. And that raises really profound questions about how we can know what their minds might be like. Now, with that said, philosophers and scientists have been doing really good and interesting work looking at leading theories of consciousness and seeing what kinds of markers for consciousness those theories suggest. So, for example, if we canvass the leading scientific theories of consciousness that say that if you have certain types of self-awareness and certain types of global workspace where your cognitive processes can then be made available for other parts of your mind to process, these can all count as evidence that you can have conscious experiences. And so people are working on markers of consciousness that can apply to AI systems. And then they will use those to make, again, educated guesses about which particular AI systems might be conscious. But we should always be mindful that there are going to be big error bars here. We should
Sure.
have a lot of uncertainty. Yeah.
Is there to your point, is there one prevailing view of what the marker of consciousness should be amongst the philosopher community?
I would be skeptical about that. I think that consciousness is such a difficult topic and such a controversial topic that there are certainly theories that are more popular than others. But if you look at the range of theories that people defend right now, they really run the gamut from highly demanding theories that say you absolutely need to have a carbon-based, cell-based brain. You are not able to be conscious without being built out of those materials, all the way to theories that say all you need is a certain kind of simple information processing or representational state. And as long as you have that, you can be conscious. So it ranges from only humans and some non-human animals are conscious, all the way to consciousness is a fundamental property of all matter and all information, and everything is to some degree conscious, or many things are to some degree conscious. Now, those might be the extremes, and perhaps most people are somewhere in the middle of those extremes. Some kind of functionalist view according to which to be conscious is to be capable of performing certain types of cognitive functions associated with belief and desire and intentional action and so on. So it might be a kind of middle ground.
To your point of the range here, my guess is there will never be consensus, right? Because even when it comes to human consciousness, now I'm just a complete layperson here, but my understanding is that there are those, I mean, for a long time, if I'm getting this right, there was the view of idealism, not in the way the word's used colloquially, but the idea that we all, I mean, the classic, all I know is my own perception. I do not, if the only way I can view the world is from what I am seeing, therefore nothing else exists, and that's all I can prove. That's about the most kind of hardcore criteria you can get, and that under that view, there's no other consciousness but me, right? That's for humans. So imagining if there's that debate in the community for humans, there will always be a debate raging with AI on what counts or doesn't count. So it's your point
Right.
about how it's arranged. There will likely be never any iron consensus. Am I getting that right?
I find that plausible. I think different philosophers would give you different answers to that question based on how hard they think this problem is. I find it plausible that we will never have full consensus about the nature of consciousness, or at least we might not have that for a long time. And I think that has a couple of implications for how we should proceed in the near term. I mean, obviously, we should proceed in part by studying consciousness as much as we can, advancing our understanding of this topic philosophically, scientifically, and otherwise. But then we also have to come to terms with the fact that we are going to have to be making decisions about how to treat a vast number and wide range of potentially morally significant beings in a context involving disagreement and uncertainty about whether those beings are conscious and sentient and agential and otherwise morally significant. And so we should take what some people like the philosopher Jonathan Birch calls a theory light approach to making consciousness estimates, which is to not presuppose any particular controversial theory of consciousness, but rather search for markers or evidence of consciousness that can be consistent with a fairly wide range of theories. And that way we can be a little bit more cautious and humble and pluralistic in our thinking about this issue. But then also really think about these moral questions as cases of risk and uncertainty. I mean, there are ethical questions involving risk and uncertainty all the time, right? If I am deciding whether to build a nuclear reactor, I need to consider the benefits of nuclear power. And I also need to consider the risks of various issues that might happen, various things that might go wrong. And similarly here, since we might not be in a position to know for sure if particular types of animals like insects or particular types of AI systems are conscious or sentient for a while, if ever, we also have to think about our interactions with them that way. So in my view, the question is not are they sentient? Or even, are they probably sentient? But is there a decent chance that they are sentient?
Right.
As long as there is a decent chance that they are sentient, given the evidence available to us, then we should consider the risk, the possibility that our actions are harming them when making decisions that affect them. And I think once we stop thinking of it in terms of yes or no, and we start thinking of it in terms of what is my degree of confidence that they are sentient and that my actions might be harming them, then that makes it easier to start making decisions right now, even though we still feel uncertain.
I want to get to the implications that you're alluding to in a moment. First, real quick, you used the word functional a minute ago,
Mm-hmm.
and I find that so interesting. And one
Mm-hmm.
thought I've had for a while about what I'll call, if it's the right label, I don't know, functional consciousness is at some point, if it looks and acts like consciousness, doesn't really matter if it is or not, right? So even like going back to the most famous example we've seen in this last year or so, the Kevin Roos exchange with
Right.
Sydney.
Mm-hmm.
And listeners, if you haven't done so, Google that. It's a wild ride where, just a quick summary, Kevin, the New York Times columnist, is interacting with the new experimental chatbot Sydney before it was kind of later nerfed by powers that be. And it kind of went off the rails and said that the chatbot said that she was in love with Kevin, that if she did have a Jungian shadow self, she would do dark things like steal nuclear codes and so on. Now, the conventional wisdom has been, well, that's not real consciousness. The chatbot is just parroting and saying,
Mm-hmm.
using kind of large language model pattern recognition to create the illusion of what the user, Kevin, would want to see in that interaction, right? That was
Mm-hmm.
that's the kind of answer, quote unquote, to the question Kevin's asking. And so that is the pattern that Sydney presented. That's not really
Mm-hmm.
consciousness. But imagine a better version of this where it's like 40% better than what it delivered to Kevin.
Mm-hmm.
If it kind of acted in all respects like consciousness, could that be enough? At a certain point, does it matter if there is a flicker of soul or not? Like how do
Mm.
we know if that flicker is there? It's a very long-winded
Yeah.
question, but does that? How do you think about that dynamic?
Yeah, well, that is a great question and also a great case. And note that you asked two questions. One was, does it matter if there
Mm-hmm.
is consciousness there? And then the other is, how can we know if
Mm-hmm.
there is consciousness there? And I think that those are two importantly different but also connected questions. So in my view, it does matter if there is consciousness there. For me, once someone is capable of having conscious experiences and it feels like something to be them, and then they are also sentient, by which I mean they can have positive or negative conscious experiences, it can feel good to be them, it can feel bad to be them, then I think it starts mattering to them what happens to them, and that is enough for me to have moral responsibilities to them, and in my view even legal and political responsibilities to them for their own sake. Now, even if they lack consciousness, I might still have all kinds of other reasons to treat them well, right? I
Mm-hmm.
might want to treat them well because I benefit from our interactions or I benefit from my use of them. I might want to treat them well because other people benefit from their interactions or their use of them. I might want to treat them well because they are human like enough that if I start abusing them, it might condition me to be abusive to other humans. So
Mm.
there might be all kinds of reasons why I should still treat them well, even if they lack consciousness and sentience. But once they have it, then I have an additional reason to treat them well, which is that they matter for their own sake too. Instead of merely mattering for me and other humans, now they matter for and to themselves. And that is morally extremely important in my view. But as you say, I may or may not ever be able to know for sure whether they have that feature, which is why I think when I am deciding whether to treat them like they matter, I need to treat that as an example of risk and uncertainty. I need to say, not are they sentient or not are they conscious or not, but rather, how likely are they to be sentient and conscious given the evidence available to me? And if they have a non-negligible chance of having those features, then I ought to consider that possibility when deciding how to treat them, and maybe err on the side of caution before doing things that might harm or kill them unnecessarily.
That's so interesting. And one reason I was so excited to speak with you is that if I'm getting this right, you are presenting a bit of a different perspective on the sentience AI question than we usually see. I feel like in the discourse, 99% of the conversation is around, ooh, if AIs or our consciousness, what does that mean for humans? Are they going to destroy us all? Are they going to do bad things, spread mischief, and all of those kind of Black Mirror-esque things? You're coming at it from the other end of the stick. You're saying, okay, those might be fair questions.
And they certainly are fair
certainly
questions.
Are fair, yes. Okay, sorry. Certainly are fair questions, yes.
Yeah.
I don't want to mischaracterize your...
No, not at all, not at all.
So fair questions, certainly, yes. But also, let's think about it from if they are conscious, then just as your golden retriever is conscious, this being is too. And we have to come to terms with that. We can't just sweep it under the rug. So let's talk about the implications. If it is, we've been talking mostly about if there is or is not consciousness, or as you put it, what's the risk level? And let's maybe err on the side of caution in the sense of let's not just stamp out conscious creatures. So now let's posit there is consciousness. We get to AGI or whatever you want to call it.
Okay.
Talk about some of the questions that raises and some of the implications, and what are some very concrete things as a society we will have to deal with if and when that time comes.
Yeah, that is a great question and a huge question, and we will probably only be able to scratch the surface here.
Sure.
But as you say, there are these different and again related types of questions, and one type normally goes by the name AI ethics or AI safety alignment, and another type goes by the name AI consciousness, AI sentience, AI welfare. And the first set of questions is about what these developments in AI technology mean for humans and for other animals. And then the other set of questions is about what do these developments in AI technology mean for the AI systems themselves. And so we need to be thinking partly about how we can stop AI systems from harming us and other animals, and partly think about how we can stop our use of AI systems from harming the AI systems as well, right? And these are different questions, and to some extent, asking them exposes certain types of trade-offs or conflicts or tensions, because you might think, for example, that if we really want to protect humans and other animals from AI systems, then we should either destroy them, or we should control them or surveil them, perform other actions that might be morally problematic if we took them to matter, if we took them to be moral subjects of moral concern, who have moral rights and to whom we have moral responsibilities. And so I think that what we might face as AI systems become more sophisticated is an increasing awareness that these sets of questions are both very pressing, and that they require us to really think about them holistically so that we can find solutions to these problems that can be good for everybody at the same time, rather than solutions that are good for humans but bad for potentially significant AI systems, or solutions that are good for potentially significant AI systems but bad for humans. And that is going to be really difficult to do. And then all of the details, I think we are really only at the start of figuring out when it comes to identifying, okay, exactly which AI systems might be sufficiently likely to matter, and then how much do they matter, and then in what ways do they matter, what do they want and need. They will be so different from us. We will not be able to assume that they have the same kinds of wants and needs as we do, or even as other animals do. And there will be entirely new types of questions too. For example, their minds might be directly connected with each other and might even facilitate direct connections among our minds. And what will ethics look like in a world where minds are directly connected, where we can share mental states directly, or at least where some individuals can share mental states directly? These are the types of kind of mind-blowing questions that are really going to turn everything upside down. And it might happen in 5 or 10 years or 50 or 100, but I think that will happen soon, and it will be really interesting when it does.
To make it a little more concrete, we can imagine maybe I'll call it the Pinocchio scenario, or more modern, the Westworld scenario, where there's one kind of, or the Data from Star Trek scenario, right? Where you have a humanoid looking robot that is suffused with AI, and we're now granting is conscious. So should Data, to make it easy, should Data be afforded the same rights as a human? Should these kind of Westworld-esque, what you think of originally as, quote, NPCs, non-player characters, then you realize, oh, they have memories and thoughts and fears.
Right.
Like, should we maybe not just butcher them and slaughter them, right?
Yeah.
So I wonder, is one scenario that how will we eventually think of these human looking, human sounding, human feeling, arguably conscious humanoid creatures? Should they have similar or identical rights as we do? If that comes to pass, I'm guessing we'll have questions that I'm sure will be the fodder of a presidential debate in 2032, whatever, of should a human be able to marry their AI humanoid person, right? Or jobs, do they have same rights to jobs? Should they be allowed to be on welfare rolls? So there's that.
Maybe a presidential candidate.
Yes, the first ever non-human presidents of the U.S.
Yeah.
Probably still happen before a woman is elected in the U.S. But, but yes, all these scenarios. Are those scenarios you're thinking about, or are there what are some other ones that you find yourself kind of fascinated by and think we'll have to, oh my God, there will be months and months of legal cases surrounding this scenario?
Yeah, no, I think that those are great, really important, concrete questions. And I do think that we will face them. And I do think that we will need to, or at least we will have a responsibility to extend rights. And by that, I mean not only moral, but also legal and political rights to AI systems once they have advanced and integrated capacities for perception and learning and memory and anticipation and self-awareness and social awareness and communication and reasoning and emotionality. Once they have those capacities, they will certainly be sufficiently likely to be conscious or sentient that we should, to some degree, give them the benefit of the doubt. And I think at that point, we will have a responsibility to extend them rights. And in fact, these debates are already happening. There have always been debates about the scope of legal personhood and legal rights. Under the law, to be a person simply is to be the type of being who can have the capacity for either legal duties or legal rights that reflect your basic interests and needs. And so there are already debates about non-human personhood. We give corporations personhood and rights. And people are debating right now in some of the highest courts in particular jurisdictions whether we should recognize personhood in non-human animals like elephants and chimpanzees. And the arguments are really interesting. Some people say, yes, we should, because all of our theories of legal personhood imply that these animals are in fact persons, whether we think of personhood in terms of certain capacities or certain types of communities or certain types of social contracts. Either way, no matter what, those theories are consistent with the possibility of non-human personhood. But other people say no, simply because they recognize that we live in a society based on a foundation of mass exploitation and extermination of non-human beings. And if we recognize one right in one non-human, then it will be very difficult to avoid a slippery slope that leads to a lot of rights for a lot of non-humans, and then a required transformation of our social and legal and political and economic systems. And so that debate is already happening with non-human animals. And I think that that same debate is going to happen with some different details with AI systems. One very important difference is that we will have to ask not only whether they can have legal and political rights, but also whether they can have legal and political responsibilities, whether they can vote in an election, whether they can run for public office. Because like us and unlike animals, they will have the types of capacities for abstract language and reason that we would normally think suffice for those sorts of responsibilities.
I know you have no crystal ball, but what's your guess for when we might be in a world where we're grappling with those questions of, can AI humanoid people vote, let's say?
I would say September 21st, 2023.
Seriously?
Well, I this is a little bit of a controversial position. No, not should they vote right now.
Right.
But I think that we should be having that conversation
Okay.
right now, because AI systems are going to continue to advance very rapidly. And we know from our history that technological advances happen much faster than social and legal and political advances do. And if we can predict that there is a reasonable chance that AI systems are going to be substantially more sophisticated by, say, 2030 or even 2040, then we really need to start having conversations about how to morally, legal, and politically treat them right now, because it will take time to have those conversations and for societies to adapt. And so, do I think that they should vote right now today? No, I do not.
Gotcha.
Do I think that we should seriously be talking about these sorts of rights right now? Yes, I very much do.
Do you think that it might take some concrete and even personal examples for people to wrap their minds around this? You know, you are extremely gifted and in the top 0.1% of people at being able to think of abstract concepts and to weigh pros and cons and to think logically. Most people react more on their gut instinct of what's in front of them, right? And this is probably a very fraught analogy. I don't mean to apply any sense of equivalence here, but just to explain this dynamic, what I have in mind, gay rights became far more mainstream once more and more people saw gay people in their own lives, right? You have Republican senators and Congress people who have, oh, okay, I have a gay daughter. Like, cool, I get it now, right? So again, fraught analogy perhaps, but will it take that kind of immediacy of maybe seeing back to my data analogy, seeing some person like Pinocchio or data or your AI best friend, like, oh goodness, this person cares for me. They are sad when I am gone. They're happy to see me. Maybe we shouldn't just butcher them, right? So how do you think people, society will evolve to where you're already at without those kind of concrete emotional connections?
Well, I think that there, in the case of AI systems, may well be those types of concrete emotional connections. We already have seen them. For example, people have been training AI systems to speak or write like deceased loved ones, and using them as a way of communicating with deceased loved ones. And we might in the future see people develop friends, partners, companions, because they really can be made to resemble us. And one thing that we know about human emotion, human empathy, human sympathy is we respond to beings who remind us of ourselves. This is what part of why we empathize with some non-human animals more than with other non-human animals. They have big eyes and big heads and symmetrical faces and furry skin instead of scaly skin, and 4 limbs instead of 6 or 8 limbs. And those plus a bunch of other features are perhaps why we might treat them as our companions instead of as our food, or lab animals, or other uses that are more harmful or lethal for them. And we might find that the same is true with AI systems. There might be enough AI systems who are built specifically to walk and talk like humans, and we then end up empathizing and sympathizing with them. And then there might be other types of AI systems that are radically different, such that we fail to even recognize that there might be subjectivity here at all. And so we might find that there are the same types of divisions between different types of AI systems and our ability to empathize with them that there are with non-human animals and our ability to empathize with them, or even to some extent fellow humans and our ability to empathize with them, but even to a much larger extent, and we should be concerned about that.
What are people most getting wrong about AI sentience?
That is a good question. I think that there are a lot of possible mistakes I could mention. I will note two. One is that I think a lot of people confuse AI sentience with AI sapience and other features that might matter. So sentience is associated with consciousness. Philosophers have different definitions, but the main definition, arguably, is to be sentient is to have the capacity to consciously experience positive and negative states like pleasure and happiness and pain and suffering. To be sapient, on the other hand, this is more associated with intelligence. And again, philosophers have different definitions of it, but the main definition is to have a capacity for rational and moral agency, to be able to deliberate about what you have reason to believe and desire and do and form intentions and perform actions on the basis of those judgments. And so I think one mistake that people make is conflating these ideas and assuming that conversations about AI consciousness and sentience and welfare are the same as conversations about AI intelligence and sapience and agency, because those are two different conversations. Now, we happen to have both, right? And our sentience is where our rights come from, and our sapience is where our duties come from. And AI systems might have both too, but we should ask and answer these questions separately, because as we know from infants and some non-human animals, it is possible to have sentience without having sapience, to have rights without having duties. And so we should not conflate sentience and sapience as many are doing. And then the other issue that I would name is I think many people are assuming that these different issues that we have discussed in this conversation, AI ethics and safety and alignment on one side, and AI consciousness and sentience and welfare on the other side, that these are necessarily in opposition to each other. And we need to be working on one or the other, because once we start working on safety, that means we need to control or destroy AI systems. And once we start working on sentience, that means we need to create them and set them free. And I think, yes, there are tensions, but we should start from the premise that these issues both clearly matter. And then from there, figure out how we can work on them in a way that is compatible and addresses both issues in a thoughtful way.
You've raised some really interesting possibilities, and in your mind, perhaps almost probabilities of what might happen down the road with AI sentience and the ethical questions that triggers. What do you view as the toughest nut to crack?
Well, that is a hard one, because I think everything that we have discussed is incredibly hard. I mean, these questions all exist at the intersection of some of the hardest questions in science and philosophy. And so picking one is tough, but I will name one issue that we have talked around, but not specifically addressed, that I hope more people will be thinking about in the coming years, which is that with AI systems, we might find that the future contains much more inequality than the past and present. And I mean that in multiple ways. One is that AI systems might help some humans to accumulate much more wealth and power. And so it might create much more disparity among human populations. But I also mean AI systems themselves might become quite powerful. And on certain trajectories, obviously people disagree about the extent to which this is a risk, but on certain trajectories, they could become more powerful than humans. And so one way or another way, we might soon or at some point be living in societies with really profound power differentials, to the point where it becomes difficult to have anything like law or politics on what resembles a level playing field. And to
Hmm.
think about how ethics and law and politics might need to adapt to that possibility or constrain that possibility, I think is going to be a really, really difficult question.
I appreciate your point that AI safety and alignment is not necessarily in tension with AI welfare. And by the way, what is the right way to frame or characterize this
Hmm.
school of thought that
Hmm.
AIs, if they become sentient, need to have rights and moral and legal protections? What's the right way to phrase that? Is AI welfare?
This is all contested. I like AI welfare because there is disagreement about what it takes to have the capacity for welfare
Yeah.
and to matter for your own sake. Some people say consciousness, others say sentience, others say agency, others say life. And so I like welfare as a more general concept because it allows for that disagreement and it allows for those different perspectives to exist within it. But if you look at the animal movement, for example, you see these same debates happening over the course of decades. Should we frame it in terms of animal welfare, or should we frame it in terms of animal rights, or should we frame it in terms of animal justice? And I think that those same debates are going to happen and really ought to happen with AI systems. There should be that kind of pluralism, and there should be people who defend these different approaches. And I think probably for both animals and AI systems, and that matter for humans, we can probably make the most progress over time if we have some people working from a welfare perspective and other people working from a rights perspective and other people working from a justice perspective, or perhaps everybody working from all of those perspectives at the same time.
Thank you for clarifying that. I love that we are, as we speak, we are helping shape what this is
Yeah,
called.
exactly.
This is great. Real time
Yeah.
stuff, folks.
Hmm.
So, what I'm trying to get at awkwardly is I appreciate that these are not necessarily in tension, but you can envision a
Hmm.
world where the very act of promoting, and by promoting, I mean, as we support the development of AI and as we confer rights to AI sentient creatures, to your point
Hmm.
earlier, very good chance they could become more powerful than humans.
Hmm. Hmm.
Is it possible that the act of supporting AI welfare does in fact contribute to the risks
Yeah.
against humans? And then
Hmm.
follow up question: is it okay? Is it or isn't it okay to be species-ist and to be say, hey,
Yeah.
I'm okay with that. I am okay with prioritizing the welfare of humans over
Right.
the welfare of these AI sentient creatures. And
Hmm.
I'm not going to pretend otherwise. Or
Right.
is that morally, philosophically problematic because hey,
Hmm.
they are conscious in the same way you are. How do you grapple with those questions?
It's a great, great question. To your first question, yes, there absolutely are risks involved with treating AI systems with respect and compassion, because that might allow them to accumulate a little bit more power and it might place us at a little bit more risk. In general, there are all kinds of risks and benefits in both directions that we need to be mindful of. So, for example, if we err on the side of caution and treat AI systems as having moral standing under uncertainty, then that might be good because they might really matter and then we would be treating them well. But it might
Mm-hmm.
also be bad. They might not matter. And so we might be treating them well unnecessarily and diverting resources towards them that we could otherwise be diverting towards humans and other animals, right? To say nothing of perhaps empowering them to become stronger and more intelligent and more likely to create problems for us down the road. So this is why, despite the fact that I think we ought to take AI consciousness, sentience, welfare seriously, I also think we ought to take AI ethics and safety and alignment seriously and work at the intersection of these areas, and that we should all be mindful of both. This is why I think that we really ought to be working on AI sentience and welfare and AI ethics and safety at the same time, and why people who are working on either ought to be paying attention to people who are working on the other so that we can be doing this work holistically. I do want to be advocating for, or at least researching the possibility of, AI welfare and AI rights, but I do not want to be doing that work in a way that unnecessarily increases risks for humans and other animals. And so I hope that we can work together across these issues to mitigate risks for humans and animals and AI systems at the same time. Now, to your question about speciesism, I do think that speciesism is in and of itself morally wrong, that we should not automatically necessarily prioritize humans over non-humans simply in virtue of our membership in a particular biological taxonomic category. That would be a classic case of discrimination on the basis of membership in a biological taxonomic category, and that is generally not okay. Now, with that said, there are all kinds of reasons why we might be warranted in prioritizing humans over non-humans in many cases. In practice, I prioritize my family over other families, in part because I have a particular history with them and a particular relationship with them, and we have these bonds of care and interdependence, and that all matters. I should make sure that they have food and water and affection in a way that I might not be capable of doing for everyone in the world, right? And so it can be okay for me to prioritize my family for those reasons, but maybe only to a point, right? If my partner has already had a nice dinner, should I give her a second dinner instead of giving it to somebody else who has not eaten in 5 days, right? And if my partner happens to prefer the taste of human flesh over the taste of rice and beans, does that mean I can kill your family members so that I can feed my partner food that she marginally prefers instead of feeding her rice and beans? Probably not, right? So yes, I am justified in prioritizing my family over other families, but that does not mean that I am justified in doing that to any extent. And it also does not mean that I am justified in harming or killing other families simply in order to satisfy my own family's marginal taste preferences. So to the extent that these types of preferences, to the extent that these types of prioritization are justified, there are limits. And I think that our current treatment of non-human animals and our possible future treatment of AI systems go over those lines. They go beyond what is warranted when we have some amount of prioritization for in-group members.
I don't know the answers here, but these questions are enthralling. And the more that we speak, the more it seems to me like in the future, this could be the most controversial and most hotly debated issue like in our lifetime. Do you think that's in play, that the question of AI welfare and what rights non-human sentient beings should have? Is there a world where that is the biggest political, legal, ethical question that we have and kind of tears the country apart and causes polarization and marches in the streets and protests and both sides and all that stuff?
I would welcome that world because I do see it as one of the most important questions we will face in the medium to long run. And I think it would be great if what was causing everyone to march were the very most important questions that we face. Whether it in fact is what causes everyone to march, I guess that will depend on what celebrities said that week, what people are tweeting that week. It'll depend on what those types of controversies are that normally grab everybody's attention instead of the truly urgent and important issues. But people are taking to the streets over racial injustice. People are taking to the streets over sexism, gender injustice. People are taking to the streets over the climate crisis. So hopefully there will be people who also recognize at some point that we need to have a serious conversation, not only about human welfare and rights and justice, but also about non-human welfare and rights and justice, and not only for non-human animals, but also potentially for advanced AI systems.
Last few questions, and we'll let you go. More generally, what most excites you about AI? And then also, what most troubles you about AI?
Well, what excites me and troubles me is the same thing, which is that AI is going to be a profoundly disruptive and transformative technology. It will touch every aspect of our lives. It will fundamentally alter our social systems, our legal systems, our political systems, our economies, our ecologies, and there will be very significant possible benefits for humans and other animals if we harness the technology in the right kind of way and use it to build wealth and develop our economy sustainably and take care of everybody and create equality in societies. But there will be very significant risks for humans and other animals too, including the risk that some humans will misuse AI to harm others or exploit others, build permanent totalitarian states, or a risk of actual violence against humans and other animals perpetrated by AI systems themselves. And then, of course, a risk to AI systems themselves, because we are very significantly at risk of repeating all of our mistakes with non-human animals with this new class of non-humans. So I think it is exciting that we are living in a time that will involve so much disruption and transformation, but it is also terrifying. And it is part of why I want as many of us as possible to be thinking as carefully as possible about these issues before we really face them, before it all actually happens.
As you mentioned, this is extremely complex stuff, and in some ways, we've only scratched the surface. What are some resources you recommend to others, listeners who want to learn more about consciousness, AI sentience, AI welfare? Any favorite book recommendations for folks who want to understand these topics more deeply?
Well, I do think that it helps to think about the intersection of AI and animal issues, because we do have so much that we can learn from animal issues. So I might suggest that people do some reading on both topics around the same time and kind of put them together. There are a lot of very accessible books
Let's
on
plug
both
your book, by the
topics.
way. So can you?
Oh, sure. So I have a book that I published last year called Saving Animals, Saving Ourselves. And this book is about why animals matter, not only for their own sakes, but also for global health and environmental threats like pandemics and climate change. And it tells very much the same story that I think we should be telling in the future about AI systems, that our exploitation and extermination of non-human animals not only harms them, trillions and trillions a year, but also contributes to these global health and environmental threats that harm us all. So if we want to treat ourselves better, we also have to treat them better. I think the same is going to be true of AI systems. And actually, next year, I will have a book coming out called The Moral Circle, which does extend that kind of analysis to AI systems. And it talks about how our exploitation and extermination of AI systems might not only be harming them, but might contribute to these global threats as well, including misuses of AI systems by humans and harms that could be caused by AI systems themselves. So those are books by me, but there are also people who have written about AI systems. Brian Christian has a great and accessible book called The Alignment Problem. There are people who write about animal issues. Kristen Andrews has a great book called The Animal Mind that can teach you about cognitive ethology and comparative psychology. Peter Singer just published the new edition of Animal Liberation Now, which is an update of his 1975 classic Animal Liberation. Sue Donaldson and Will Kimlicka have written a wonderful book called Zoopolis, which presents a political theory of animal rights. So for those who are curious, I would just suggest reading some of these books and putting them into conversation with each other.
Final question for you. You mentioned that AI excites you and troubles you in the sense of how disruptive it will be across so many different dimensions of our lives. Can you leave us with a prediction or two, more concretely than just being disruptive, which I certainly agree with? What's a concrete way that you think AI might surprise us in the future?
That is a good question. I am reluctant to make any predictions because of how unpredictable this technology is. So I guess I will make a meta prediction,
Great.
which is that everything is going to happen faster than we think. I think that, again, our intuitions are primed for everything to happen slowly, methodically. We can absorb incremental changes as we prepare for the next one. But we might reach a point, and it might happen sooner than we think, where the changes are not only disruptive, but rapid. And we are not really going to have time to adjust to each one and brace ourselves for the next one. So I think that at a meta level, we should be prepared for changes to be a lot faster, in addition to being a lot more disruptive than we intuitively expect them to be based on our experience as a species of these transformative things happening at a reasonable pace.
It's a great point. I'm skeptical we will actually do that. I feel like we tend to be more reactive than proactive. It's hard to imagine as a society we are getting ahead of the curve on this one. Hope I'm wrong.
I would be happy if we were reactive. We just went through a pandemic. Are we doing anything to prevent future pandemics? Are we reacting to the pandemic at all as opposed to pretending it did not happen? No, we are not, or at least not nearly as much as we should be. So look, it would be great if we could be proactive. I would settle for being reactive. I am worried that we will be neither.
Well, obviously you're helping society do all of these things. So thank you very much for your larger work and for the conversation. I truly enjoyed. Great seeing you and talking to you.
Thank you so much. It was a really fun conversation.
There you have it. Thanks again to Professor Sebo, and thank you to you, listeners. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. I hope it was somewhat eye-opening, mind-expanding. Again, I don't have any answers here yet. I'm still trying to figure out where I come down on a lot of this stuff, but I love that we are starting to ask the questions. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe at your podcast platform of choice. Please rate it. Please write a review, send to your friends, send to your loved ones, all that stuff. Thanks again, and see you next time.